This is Van Vance. You're listening to the Proffitt Report podcast with Doug Proffitt.
We are saying congratulations and goodbye, folks, to a WHAS 11 News mainstay. My great friend and co-anchor Rachel Platt is leaving TV news after 29 years on the air here at Channel 11 and reporting some extraordinary stories as well. You're going to find her next, though, at the Fraser History Museum on West Main Street. As that venue continues to evolve and change and really ramp up its community outreach, it's a perfect match for Rachel. She's not only an extraordinary journalist, but mom as well. And she's married to Gary Fogel at Bellarmine University. Her roots now run deep in Louisville. I've never met anyone who could adopt a hometown faster than Rachel did. And our career together as the weekend anchors in 1989 sort of started this way.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Rachel Platt.
And I'm Doug Proffitt. It has been a big day, and things are still developing. This is a special hour-long news presentation from WHAS 11, so stay with us.
I'm going to start this with one word because I know it'll bring a memory. La Sabra.
So you know what I thought it was going to be? Battle axe.
Well, now we can't say that anymore because we're all PC. We can't call you the battle axe, but you were. We did call you the battle axe.
You called me the battle axe, Doug Proffitt. I don't know that anybody else to my face in the newsroom called me battle axe. That was you.
Well, I finally got Rachel corralled right before she leaves us here at WHAS 11 after an extraordinary 29-year career. I'm just going to say it feels like you've been around 30 years.
It feels like I've been around 30 years, maybe more.
We've had a lot of fun, and the backstory is Rachel was hired as my weekend co-anchor in 1989, and I never met you. I met you the day you walked in this building to start your first Saturday. We didn't even audition together.
No, I didn't even think about that. I walked in, and it was like, boom, here we go. But you have to admit, Douglas, that it was like we had chemistry from the start, and you and I had very competitive drives that at times were like, I get the lead.
Well, we were street reporters who had been given anchor jobs, and the culture at this building was you didn't really get to be an anchor unless you knew your chops.
Well, and you had to go out and report. And you and I remember in the early days, we would alternate. One of us would do the afternoon story. One of us would do the evening story. We split a photographer, and we were out the door from the minute we came in. And you and I usually, I think, talked that morning and said, okay, here are my story ideas. Here were yours. And it was just go, go, go the whole time.
Well, I believe it or not, and it's a story I've been telling people. I think that was your idea because your first words to me when you walked in is, hello, I'm Rachel. What are our problems and what do we need to fix?
I don't remember that, but that sounds like me.
And my answer to you was, we need more local news in this newscast. They weren't doing it right, and that was your plan, and it really was a lot of fun.
And then I probably had lists because you always make fun of me. Do you have a list going? Because you know me, I'm known for my lists, like those little stick-em notes everywhere.
They're everywhere. In fact, if you ever bump into Rachel at Kroger, ask to see her list. It's probably
that's the one place I don't do a list and probably should. But I have lists of things I need to do every day. Actually, that is how I start my morning when I come to work. I get to a blank piece of paper, write down the stories of the day, things I need to do work-wise and personally and professionally.
Let's address as to why you're leaving, because I've had people stop me. I even had a man stop me the other day saying, was Rachel forced out? Was this her decision? Why is she leaving?
Okay. It is my decision. And Doug, you know me because you've known me forever. This is something that I've talked about, I think at least for the last 10 years about what's the next step, what's the next chapter. And I wanted it to be something that involved community. I mean, when you get to be, a certain age, and that's what everybody thinks, I think, because it's coming at the age it is. And I'm not saying that broadcasting is always nice to people who get to be of a certain age. We know that and we've seen it. But this for me was just something about what can I do and still be engaged in the community and make that step. And this opportunity came along, and I thought it was the perfect timing for that. The station here has been nothing but supportive, and even talked about other things that, would you stay if, we could do this, this, and this. But it was really one of those things that I said, now is the time. And if it's not now, for heaven's sakes, when? And that's really what it came down to. And because of the job, and it felt like it was just right.
I had heard, and you're sort of confirming it, they did offer you other roles if you wanted to continue on.
Yeah. I mean, I think it would stay being the 4. And as you and I both know, honestly, the 5 o'clock, I kind of just started by filling in on it when Renee Murphy went to the morning show. So for a year and a half, that's kind of been, oh, that's not your job. You know how that turns out. You fill in long enough, it becomes your job.
They told me I'd do the Saturday morning news for 6 months. I did 11 years. That's true.
It happens. It happens in the broadcast world, and it happens everywhere else.
So let's talk about the Filson Historical Society where you're going, museum, excuse me.
Fraser.
The Fraser. Why
You're the one hooked on the Filson. That's where you go and do things.
The Dickens is on my mind. The Fraser History Museum on West Main Street is where Rachel's going. And they really are trying to get out in the community more. What will you do for them?
Well, and that was part of the attraction. It's Director of Community Engagement. And it was just one of those conversations that started casually. And it's, if you ever think about leaving the business, maybe think about us. And that's how it started. And then it was kind of tweaking it to, you want the job to be reflective of you and your strengths. And one of those, I think, is probably community. And as you know, Doug, we are out in the community all the time, be it with news stories, be it with community events, be it with emceeing. And I've gotten to know a lot of people. And one thing the Fraser wanted to do is have a lot more community conversations on social justice issues and to make the Fraser a little bit more reflective of the community we live in. And it was, what are your ideas for that? And had some, of course. And Simon Miners, Terry's son. So it's in my contract. I always have to work with at least one Miners. He had done a community conversation on redlining in the community. And the response that they got to it was really big. And I think they were like, maybe we have something here. And then that's when it came more to social justice issues and those kinds of things. Educational, things dealing with JCPS. We're going to work on that more as well, which they already do a wonderful job. So they already have some things that they're looking at me to work on. But it really is going to be more community engagement and making the Fraser more reflective of the community we live in.
The Fraser was created by the late Owsley Brown. Mm-hmm. Now, is it still locally owned? Do the Browns still have involvement in it?
Yes, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, Mac Brown is the head of the board of the directors. And, it started as the Arms Museum. So it's really evolved through the years. So just the changing face of it, and I kind of liken it to TV news. You have to stay relevant. And even in TV news, because times are changing, as we know with that. So what do you do to stay relevant? And I think that that's kind of where they are. How do you get it to be a living, breathing thing and have, some sort of relevance in people's lives that they want to come into this museum?
Now, here's what I always found fun. Even when you and I would argue over the news or a point.
And we did argue.
But it was never a vicious argument,
No,
folks.
it was always about the nature of the job.
It was about, and it was always an argument that for the viewers, that was what it would be, the direction of a story or how to do an interview in that. We'd always come to a compromise that I felt sometimes would be better than the initial approach we were going after.
I always think, and you and I know this, and I think it's with anything, it goes far beyond TV news, collaboration. Input. You have to know what the other person's thinking, and then you reach middle ground. I just think if you live in a vacuum and they're only your ideas, well, I'm not going to go very far. I mean, it's collaboration on every front. And I think that that's what you do in TV news. Could the conversations get a little heated? Yeah, but that's okay. But you always knew, and it wasn't ever personal, and it wasn't ever, stroke my ego with this or that. It really was about the product. And if you can get heated over a product, that's when I think passion comes in, and I'm all for that. But again, it goes back to the product. And that's what we always argued about, is how can we make this better and what's the best approach to that?
You were sort of, I always would view sort of Abe Lincoln and Henry Clay combined.
But as you well know, you work with somebody under the strenuous circumstances that can happen in a newsroom. When what hits the fan every day and how do you pivot, blood gets going and that kind of thing. But I agree. I think we always reached a compromise on stuff like that. And it always was for the betterment. And Doug will start texting me very early in the morning, folks, and say, what about this? What about that? And I have a checklist. Got that. Thought of that. Oop, didn't think of that. Good thought. Because something you sent me the other day and darn it, I hadn't thought of that one. No, but it's almost like the same brain syndrome kind of thing. when you go, you've worked with somebody so long, you know what they're thinking all the time.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. So some funny stories. Back to the La Sabra
Yeah,
thing.
explain that, Mr. Proffitt.
So this was probably early 1989, and I'm, when you see a word, folks, and you just think you know what it is, you've seen it a million times in your life. It was LASBRE, and it was in a script. General Motors was recalling the La Sabre, but I couldn't remember it. So I asked my colleagues, Rachel and the producer.
No,
at the
you
time,
asked the producer, David. I remember vividly.
Oh, you chimed in.
And he said La Sabra.
He goes, you say it La Sabra, Doug. And I said, well, that's what I thought. I go, Rachel, what do you think? Oh, yeah, I agree. La Sabra.
I don't remember that. I take issue with your no, I don't remember
I go
saying
on the air that night and say it at least 3 times in the script.
And you rolled your R's very well.
The phones are ringing. That moron, Doug Proffitt. The next day, mail. That was back when mail came to the station.
La Sabra.
Stacked up. Now, is it true that when you were anchoring with Barry Burnson one morning that a fly either flew in his mouth or landed on his face?
Yes.
What happened?
We have had the craziest things like that. Well, you and I, too, where you get choked or something like that. And I'm trying to even remember whose face it was on. And then you get hysterical because you know Burnson.
Did it land on their face?
I mean, I'm trying to remember if it went in his mouth. I'm going to have to call him and ask him. It was one of those two. Our funniest moment happened to be Creature Feature, though. You remember Dr. Foster?
Yes. Bill Foster.
With the Louisville Zoo, who's now in Birmingham. I believe he's still there. We started Pet of the Week on Good Morning Kentucky and Creature Feature every Friday just to bring a little levity and a little fun. Well, Dr. Foster was a nut, as you well know, and he loved to bring in the animals and whatever. Well, he brought this tortoise one day, and a tortoise, I think it was like once every maybe 6 months, I don't remember what it was, would go number 2.
On the set.
Well, that happened to be the day he brought the tortoise to Good Morning Kentuckiana. We did that interview hysterical with the tortoise over a trash can as it was going number 2 the entire interview. Hysterical. I mean, it's just stuff like that you go, only, in TV.
But you just learned to go with it.
Right. Oh, and Dr. Foster, too.
Not to cover it or
no, that's what made it so funny. It was one of those moments where you go, only this could have happened on TV, right? And it was a ball.
Now, your favorite stories that you've covered over 30 years, I can think of a lot that you did, but I'm sure you have about, 2 or 3 that stand out.
Probably as far as impact on me would be going to Vietnam with the men from Bardstown, because Bardstown had one of the highest mortality rates of any small city in the country during the Vietnam War. And my dad served 2 tours, and I'd always hoped to go back with my father, and his health at the time didn't permit him to go. And somehow I read the book about the Sons of Bardstown, and then I thought, boy, wonder if they would go. And somehow we got connected with Don Parrish was the name of the man who I first got connected with, and then did that trip where we went to Vietnam. They got maps out that they had from back in the day when they fought, and we had a guide and went for 10 days to Vietnam and went back to their battleground, and that is when there was a sneak attack and many of them got killed in this one night, and went back, and it was really their way of closure and going back to where that was and having this ceremony. We went with them and did a lot of it, but then we left with the camera and let them have their personal time there. That one of the most moving, life-changing things ever. And it was just to even see them and how people reacted to Americans. They were going back in hotbeds of places because we ended up going to, what was known then as Hanoi, and the Vietnamese people coming up and embracing them. And it was really a full circle moment for them that all that hostility, all of that had gone. And Americans were embraced in Vietnam, and it really was an amazing moment.
Growing up watching Vietnam just play out on the news, when you were in Hanoi, were you looking for key landmarks?
Absolutely. And I'm telling you where their battlefield was, though. I mean, it was like in the middle of nowhere, but they had their maps and took it to us, and they said, there it is. And one of the craziest things is one of the gentlemen who was with us, there was a man who came up to him and recognized him. He had given him as a child school supplies and things like that. Came up, and if I'm remembering correctly, even went back to his house and found a picture of the 2 of them together. And it was like, they knew each other, and it was the craziest thing after how many years that they were even recognizing people who still lived in that area. It really was an amazing trip.
And of course, now Vietnam's become a big tourist attraction again.
My sister went not too long ago and said, so many people are going now. And then business ventures that started with Americans. And, Gary Rodemeyer's son is there, working as well. I mean, it's just amazing how that has changed. And for these men to see that and how embracing they were, that you think all that craziness with that war. I mean, look at the culture today. Most people don't even know that war.
Let's talk about your dad. He's very interesting because going back to watching things on television, all of us got to watch the space launches. We just hung on every word by Walter Cronkite and the Apollo missions and that. But your dad was involved in those.
Right. He was an Air Force pilot. That's why we moved so much as kids. But the bulk of our time was spent at Patrick Air Force Base, which is right south of Cape Canaveral. And he was a pilot. And he flew planes that basically, we called him a droop snoot, had a huge nose, and there was telemetry in that. And he would go and basically be the communication with the astronauts and other people when they would get into dead space. He would go to faraway places in the world and be the telemetry to keep the communication going with the astronauts. So we grew up on the Apollo missions. I mean, we grew up watching those. And then later, after going to the University of Central Florida, one of my first TV jobs was in, the Melbourne, Florida area, and I got to cover space shuttle missions. And one of the highlights of my career was being able to cover Sally Ride, the first American to go in space. So it kind of felt full circle.
Wow. And your dad would chase the pods as they came through the atmosphere, wouldn't he?
Absolutely. And be part of that. And with Apollo 13, remember when they were coming back into communication, if you remember in the movie, they would say, do you read us? Do you read us? And that dramatic time where they knew if they were going to burn coming back into orbit. My dad was part of that, where he heard some of the first words and helping with that telemetry to know they were okay.
Now, when you were in Florida, you swam with manatees.
I did, and you love that story.
I do.
All right, so as we said, and if anybody has been in Air Force, okay, housing wasn't always the best when you were in Air Force housing, but what we said is we kind of had a little shanty on Patrick Air Force Base, but on $1 million property. Behind us was the Indian River, and a few blocks the other way was the Atlantic Ocean. I mean, it was the most incredible place to grow up. We literally walked out our back door onto a dock and would fish. And there were seaweed beds right around there. And that's where the manatees would come. And we'd get in with the manatees.
And they were gentle animals.
Oh, gosh, yes. Absolutely.
And you had a great childhood. You didn't have to worry about being hurt or injured or what. Y'all were just right out there.
We built forts. We built rafts. I mean, we were river rats. I was a river rat. And we just grew up. And if, there's such camaraderie on an Air Force base. Everything is on the base. You had a movie theater, a bowling alley, all that. You never had to really go off base property if you didn't want to. And no, I mean, it was a great upbringing. I loved being an Air Force brat.
And like you said, being a military brat, you moved around. Of course, your mother, Nezzie's the nucleus.
Right. My father since passed away, but my mom, absolutely. I mean, my dad traveled all the time. I mean, he was gone all the time. And I think as far as, really the Rock of Gibraltar was my mom. I mean, 4 kids. She taught, so she had a full-time job as well. And I'm like, oh my God.
Oh, I love her stories when she tells how they would get together.
Because you know my mom.
At parties.
You know my mom well.
Yeah. And when your dad would come home, they would go to...
the Officers Club.
Officers Club.
Yes, that wild times at the Officers Club.
Which had a beautiful view of, I think, the ocean.
It was right on the ocean. Sure was.
And they just dance.
And dance and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that was when you think of it in its purest form, I mean, it really was a great life when it came to that. Although, except for, now you have these multiple deployments. Now, my dad did serve 2 tours in Vietnam. And there were times as a kid you saw things, and I think back now, and it was his PTSD. I remember one time vividly in a hotel, because we were all in the same hotel room, of course, because you didn't have money to have different rooms. And I remember, it was like there was some kind of attack going on, and he jumped off the bed and was taking cover. And as a kid, you don't really realize it until later you went, yes, now you see.
Now we understand
much. He later in life talked about it, his tours in Vietnam. And I'll tell you, my sister had uncovered some of these recently. Back in the day, we did reel to reels. That's how I would write letters, or you did the old audio cassettes.
Right.
And my sister uncovered some and we listened to them not too long ago. It was just last year. And it was him talking about the war. And I will tell you, raising questions about the war.
At the time.
Yes.
Wow.
Going, I'm not sure about all this. And some of the things were being asked to do.
What year would that have been recorded, do you think?
I'm trying to be in the late 60s.
Oh, okay.
Late
so
60s.
the war was still underway when that was recorded.
Mm-hmm. And we look back and we went, wow, he was questioning some things going, not sure I agree with all this.
Now that you look back, do you think your mother's strength, did you get your strength from your mother or your father, and that helped you with journalism? Of course, you move around in small markets before you land in a spot like Louisville.
Well, and I always did tell my parents this. Moving around was the best training for what I do. Because I remember vividly my first day when I went into Patrick Elementary School. And, you walk in, oh, here I go. I'm the new girl again.
Yeah.
And that was what they would call you. You really didn't have a name. Oh, you're the new girl. And all my siblings, we've talked about this before. You were always the new girl or whatever. Because when we moved from West Virginia, think about this, because we lived in West Virginia when my dad went to Vietnam, so my mom could be closer to her family to help take care of all of us. So we can't, crew cuts, we were all pasty, pale. And then we moved to Patrick Air Force Base where long hair, tans, and my poor brother with his buzz cut. And I'll never forget. And we walk by and everybody's tanned with long flowing hair, even the boys, because they were all surfers. And we're like, oh, here we go on this one, But I will tell you, it made you adapt. So when I walk into a room now, complete strangers, I'm like, oh, this is the new girl. I know how to navigate that. And it really has helped me in life. I don't see strangers. I see opportunity to meet new people.
Well, and for a journalist, what a gift to have. You were here for a few years and you convinced your entire family to move to Louisville. Your mom was still down there. Your dad was still alive. Right. He came here. Your dad's buried here at Cave Hill Cemetery.
Absolutely. My sister ended up working for Florida Today newspaper owned by Gannett. And then her bosses there ended up coming to the Courier-Journal. And I thought, I can't seem to get down there. Maybe she comes up here. So she was the first to come up here and then had a great career with the Courier-Journal as an editorial writer and beyond. Started as the ombudsman. You and I know that. And then ended up being an editorial writer. Well, about that same time, we knew my dad's health was not doing very well, and heart issues, basically what he had. And we ended up, known for their heart doctors here, I had my dad send me all of his records, camped outside Dr. Dillon's office, and I give him the shout out. Literally, he came out of the office one day. Gene West at the time was the medical reporter and said, he's a great cardiologist. You need to talk to him. I had my dad's DVDs and all this of his heart and said, Dr. Dillon, you don't know me, but I've heard good things about you. I really am hoping you can help me and my dad. And that's how it happened.
Wow.
And he said, I'll take him on, because they would not do the surgery. He needed a triple bypass. They wouldn't do it in Florida. We literally moved my parents up here, sold that house, bought a new one, had closings the same day. My sister at that house down there. I was up here at this one. And that's how my parents came to be up here.
Even though you and I anchored the weekend news for just a few years, we in a weird way came back for these big events. And there was nothing bigger than the winter storm of 94.
Oh my gosh.
January 17th. I wasn't supposed to be on that newscast.
Burnson was stuck in Chicago.
Barry was your morning co-anchor, but he got whacked in Chicago. They haul me in, and I slide off the road 5 minutes.
Truckers.
Coming downtown, I had this beautiful Jeep, folks, a Grand Wagoneer that sat in the winter storm, and I had put it in the Friday before the storm to get normal service. It sat beautiful, warm inside a bay for an entire week. I never could drive it, so I crashed my wife's car off to the side of the road. There's a guy clearing a parking lot, and he sees me, and I said, I got to get down to WHAS. I'll give you $50. I mean, he deserved $1,000. He has an old International Harvester Scout. We come flying through the door. I got here late. Rachel went on the air at 5:30, and I wasn't there yet. But you told me, don't let him leave. He's the only one we can interview. He's the only one. He's the only driver.
I need life in the studio. It was skeleton crew because nobody could make it in.
Coming down in buckets. He was starving, so I took him to our snack bar, got him something to eat, and I said, sit in front of this camera and don't leave. We're going to ask you a million questions.
And we did. And then slowly, as the city started digging out, and I laughed because everybody said, well, how did you get in? I had at that time, it was a little Mazda Protege. I think it weighed like 10 pounds. And I said, I think I glided on the snow. I think that's the only reason.
No, I know how you got in. You also got in so early, like you were wont to do. You always do. You beat it. You beat it before it was.
There was snow, but not like crazy snow like you all.
Because when I was in his Scout, it was coming down so bad. He had me hang out the window with my hands to clean the windshield wipers as we were passing stranded
I'm so sorry,
semis.
There's not video of that.
There was passing stranded semis. It was the day before cell phones. You all had no idea whether I'd even show up.
Oh, no.
I couldn't call.
No, there was no way. And that's what was so crazy about that. But you look back at that coverage, that is one of those defining moments. We've had so many. And one thing I do say is this to me was also, it was like a bookend time to leave too, because you and I, it was like we started together and I'm going to finish with you. And it really was that full circle moment for me as well, where I thought that feels right.
I mean, you ended up anchoring a lot more winter storms, not as bad in the morning because they would always time it. It always seemed like you were on the air for a long time.
Absolutely. Ask any of the morning anchors I worked with. It was always craziness because, I mean, I've been through so many wonderful people who I've gotten to work with, on that morning show.
And then of course, we were very involved in the flooding of 97. We've had solemn events like police officer funerals, which were sad to have to cover. But then the death of Muhammad Ali, which was a world-watched event. And you and I were the ones who had to carry the coverage for this station.
But to your credit, you said we need to have some outside people with us, people who knew him, people who know this town, and people who know the important landmarks. And that really was a brilliant decision. And I know you had seen it and were inspired. And tell me about that, because that was really where you said you kind of got that idea and thought we need to do it this way.
The church shooting, the predominantly black church, which was the racist
Charleston.
kid went in there and killed in Charleston. When the station that is really good down there decided to do their extended coverage, they put 4 people on the set who knew the community. Of course, the anchors who knew the community had been there 40 years each. Extraordinary for a market that size. And they just talked. They had a conversation because it went on. And it was heartfelt. And it was people who knew what they were talking about, knew the church and knew the Charleston community. And I thought, wow, we're going to have that kind of same thing going, because we were going to be on. We were on all day. We went on the air at 8:30 in the morning.
And it was 3, 4 later. I mean,
6:30
as far as
p.m.
the live coverage, and then we started the newscast. I'm trying to remember how, but it was all day.
And the thing that caught us, folks, and this is where you can plan and plan and plan, we had no idea how many people were going to show up. We had no idea that they would roll the windows down and grab people along the route.
And you and I, because we ended up, well, we should say U of L at the time, it was Dan Hall. He was one of the people who came on with us. And then, of course, with Bates, the pastor there. And it was just remarkable because they knew everybody and everything. I mean, Dan Hall just knew every stop that they made. And then as the story and the day started progressing and we saw people lined up, you and I were jaw dropped. I mean, there were times during the coverage, I got so caught up in it, I forgot that we were actually covering it because I was so moved by it. And a lot of times, and that's when you know too, just let the story breathe, because that was unfolding and we just were watching and letting it happen.
We shut up, folks, much to your, I'm sure, great pleasure. Because people always say, would you quit talking? We see your responses, but we knew better. And when there were moments, Rachel and I just instinctively knew, because we've done this so many times and we've also made the mistakes in the past, we knew better. And those moments lived on the air. And it was extraordinary, from the ground to up in the air.
Right. And then to see the flowers, don't you remember when we saw all those petals as they went into Cave Hill? And the images that you think of, actor Will Smith rolling down the window and then starting to high five, because it became this, what had been just such a sad time, losing their native son, ended up becoming this beautiful celebration where a city, in one galvanizing, shining moment, it wasn't race, it wasn't religion, it was this, beautiful man that we all celebrated and loved for our own reasons. And it was really a coming together, I think, that was just extraordinary and moving to all of us for different reasons.
And like you say, as you have to put a big end to your television career, that that was the biggest event we had on our radar for many years because Muhammad Ali's health had been going up and down.
Right.
And we had been prepared because this station had the archives. We were the only station in the 50s shooting film, and they were covering Cassius Clay. We were it. Nobody in America had the stuff of his early life. It was a treasure
trove. It really was. And to be able to pull all of that out. And I mean, that is a moment that you and I both know we will never see that repeated. We just won't. I mean, that was one of those moments in world history. I mean, that you had a funeral that would have that kind of outpouring.
It was a world-renowned event.
Yeah.
So as we wrap this up, folks, we let you know a few things. How great friends we really are. Your boys were born nearly weeks apart from my boys.
Okay, well...
isn't that weird?
Yes. Boone and Cooper, because he's the end of February. Cooper's the beginning of March.
Cooper's your son.
They're 2 weeks apart.
Right.
And then our younger boys, Seth, of course, yours, and Logan, mine, I think they were 6 months apart. Ann and I were pregnant together both times. And there's a picture that you reminded and sent me, because I have it at my house, but we have a picture literally of Boone and Cooper as newborns in the crib. And it's so funny because their little arms are locked. And they still remain in touch, which is, when you think about that just doesn't happen anymore.
Ann found the other day a newspaper clipping. The critic at the Courier Journal at the time wrote, "What's in the water at WHAS?" Because they're all pregnant.
Right. And we were, but it has been so marvelous because it goes beyond work. What happens in life is really the important stuff. And that's where I think our bond will always be, is the fact that our families are so bonded. Whether I work here or not, you and I, we're bonded, whether you like it or not, Doug Proffitt. We are.
Oh, yes.
Forever.
Well, I love you. You know that.
I love you,
we
too.
have a great time. We have a great time together. And I want you to be able to tell people how they can reach you at the Fraser History Museum. Do you know yet?
Don't have my email just yet, but you'll be able to reach. Yeah, starting January the 14th, I'll have an email there at the Fraser that they're going to give me. In the meantime, Rachel Platt at bellsouth.net. Till the 21st, you can reach me here. But then right when I start, it will be the Fraser email that you can reach me at.
And if people have ideas for symposiums.
That is, please. And that's what I've told every guest, every story that I've done. I've gotten everybody's cell phone and said, "Oh, this isn't the last of me. I will be picking your brain for other reasons." There's a reason I have your cell phones. You know me. Anytime I go out, if I don't go to Kroger and come back with a story idea, I haven't done my job. No, seriously, because you get your best stories just by being curious and looking around and asking questions and people calling and emailing. I hope they'll still do that. I'm counting on it.
Well, as we wrap this up, folks, it's been a great fun time for me, for Rachel, and I'm just going to leave it with the one word you should never say in your life: La Sabra.
Love you.
This has been a production of WHAS 11 Media.